Hi, I'm Matthew Vande. I'm with VandeMusser Design, and we are located in Asheville, North Carolina.
And I'm his partner, Amy Musser, with the same company. And we have a company that does residential energy efficiency consulting work. We do a lot of home energy ratings, and we bill ourselves as the technical side of building green. And I think we really use home energy ratings as sort of a way to package being involved in a green project and helping people make their project as energy efficient as they want to make it. So Matt, how's business?
Business has been good. Since the recession, and even during the recession, I would say we are in an area of construction that has been growing, and especially with where we work in Western North Carolina, which is kind of a hotbed of kind of very talented, kind of cutting edge builders that are kind of looking to do energy efficiency, to an extreme that a lot of other areas of the country aren't really interested in doing quite yet. So for people like us, it's been a really good time to do this, and it's been a very good area of the country to do this. So I would say business has been good.
Great.
What types of buildings do you work in?
We work in only residential buildings, so that can range anything from a fairly small Habitat for Humanity house, or even we've worked on some tiny houses. I think the smallest one was about 400 square feet, up to single family homes. I think the largest one of those that we worked on was about 14,000 square feet. And we also work on multifamily, so apartment buildings, dormitories, anything residential. Matt, describe your typical workday.
I don't know that there is a typical workday.
I don't think there is a typical workday.
So there are days where there's a lot of time in the office working on kind of internal stuff, energy modeling, or meetings set up with clients, whether it's architects or homeowners or developers. That's a component that we do here in the office, and then there's a whole other component that happens out in the field with inspections and testing of houses for various certifications. And I would honestly say a typical workday might be kind of a mix of some office work and some in the field work. And coming from a place where I used to be a commercial architect where it was all office work, I would actually say it's a really nice way to spend a day. I remember multiple days working as an architect where you're kind of looking at the clock, trying to figure out like when the day was going to be over. And I'll be honest, in the last 10 years, I can't remember the last time I ever looked at a clock and said, wow, this day's really dragging. It's almost always the exact opposite of, I really wish I had some more time because I'm behind on stuff. So I guess a typical workday is that it's a little bit of everything. It's out in the field testing, it's out in the field inspecting, it's back in the office updating models and taking calls, and I mean, yeah, I really like the mix. I wouldn't be happy sitting at a desk 8 hours a day, but there are also definitely days when you're outside and it's 10 degrees outside, or you just fell in the mud, or it's raining cats and dogs and you really wish you were inside. Or conversely, it's 75 degrees and sunny and you're stuck in the office all day doing stuff. So
it's nice to have a mix. There are definitely times when you'd rather be somewhere else, but honestly, you can usually just go do something else if that's happening.
Describe your typical client, Amy.
I would say, I don't know if we have a typical client, but most of our clients are actually other professionals. And contractors are probably the most common. And we really like to work with people who already know how to build. And what we're helping them do is just take it a little bit further. So, if a contractor comes to us and already knows how to build a house, we can help them build it greener, build it more energy efficient. we can help them try new things, but feel like that's a little less risky than just trying it on their own, because we have that experience with some of those new things. Yeah. So we work with contractors, we work with architects, we work directly with owners, but our typical, and we work with heating and air contractors too. But our typical client is a contractor.
And I would say it's typically a builder that we've worked with multiple times before. So we do get some one-offs where it's either a homeowner that's building their own house where we might not work with them again, and that's perfectly fine, and we certainly have our share of those. But I'd say a good chunk of our builders are people that started off not having a lot of experience in green building, and then over time, as we've worked with them and they've gotten more comfortable, I think they've been interested in trying to kind of advance themselves. So those builders tend to get more technical and more, I guess, more in tune with the energy efficiency end of things than when they start. So I'd say a typical client is somebody that we've worked with on multiple houses before that really kind of has it kind of figured out, so which is great.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, we definitely put a lot more time into new clients to kind of help them get up to speed. But the beautiful thing about green building is it's always evolving. So you're kind of helping people change, and that's a continuous process. So there isn't really an end point. And one of the exciting things about it is that there are new technologies and new ways of doing things, and the code will evolve or the programs will evolve. And we get to be the ones who kind of go to builders and say, hey, this is coming. You probably want to think about it. So, the most recent one that comes to my mind right now is that right now, variable capacity heat pumps are really kind of coming into their own. They've been around for a while, but they've been expensive and they just haven't really been mainstream. And just this year, the price of them is coming down to the point where we're starting to see more of them. And it's been really fun as we talk to builders about projects to say, hey, I think this might be a good fit for this project. This is why. And, at least price it, because if you don't start doing this year, I think you're probably going to start doing it next year or the year after. So it's, constantly working with people to help them evolve and up their game. Do you want to talk about how clients normally contact us?
Sure. I think that's kind of changed a little bit over the course of us working in the industry. I think when we started off, it was kind of a core group of kind of green builders in town that were wanting to do certifications, and there were a handful of people doing what we did back 10 years ago. So they would contact all of the raters in town to kind of find out what they offered. And I think what was nice on our end is having kind of gone to college for this stuff, we kind of had a leg up on a lot of other people that did this. So we could sit down with them and kind of talk about, here are the services and here's how we do it. I think what was really interesting is when the recession happened, not only did we have the people that were wanting to do green building kind of just as like something that they had always been planning on doing, but we started getting a lot of builders that were realizing, the market is tightening and I need to kind of have a leg up on our competition. So they were like, hey, green building seems to be something that's selling relatively well in the Western North Carolina area. So we actually, for a while, we're talking to a lot of builders that had very little experience in green building because they wanted to kind of figure out how to do it so that they could market their houses to more people. So it was a really interesting time of kind of really inexperienced builders on the energy efficiency end of things that over time have really converted to really, really good technical builders that really just got into it kind of as a marketing thing initially and realized, hey, this really has been a good thing. So now this time, currently I'd say it's kind of a mix of, new builders wanting to kind of get into the green building end of things, and also a lot of builders that we've worked with over time that are kind of coming back as repeat clients. and have had such a good experience building the house and being able to market it as a green home and getting it sold, quicker and for more money. So it's a nice balance right now of new and old builders. So.
And actually, at this point, we've been doing this long enough that we get some clients because they have come up through the ranks and worked for companies that we've worked with, and now they're going out on their own and they're contacting us, which is very cool.
Describe one of your favorite projects.
I think my favorite projects are the net zero energy projects. And I really like the net zero energy projects that are kind of real people budget scale projects. So, yeah, and we've been fortunate to we've done at least 20 of them, including our own house that we're sitting in right now. Just, real normal people who have real normal budgets who come to us and say, net zero energy is really important to me. Energy efficiency is really important to me. Help us figure out how to spend our money and allocate our money so that we can get there. And at this point, it's a very doable goal. You just have to prioritize it as much as someone else might prioritize having beautiful cabinetry, or having, granite countertops is the cliche. So, having those clients who really value what we do and want to get there in a practical way, it's a very fun problem-solving process, and those projects have turned out really nicely. So I'm really proud of that work.
I'd say in addition to that, I think usually the ones that I think end up being the most interesting are the ones that we build either for architects for themselves or builders for themselves. And I would actually kind of include our house with that, because I think those people are willing to experiment a little more than they are willing to do that for a client. So they will tend to play it safe and do some kind of tried and true things for clients because they obviously don't want to get a call back saying, hey, something's going a little wacko with this. But a good example would be our house where, we had a lot of kind of industry people that, found out we were building our house and were offering up, some technologies and some materials that were either fairly new or were kind of fairly cutting edge that we were like, hey, we might actually be able to kind of afford to experiment a little bit. And we also knew going in that we were going to try and do some technical things that we were going to have to monitor over time to see how they've performed. So I would say our house has been a really great project for us, and a lot of our builders that also try to do similar things, because over time we can go back and revisit those houses a lot easier than we can for a homeowner and kind of see how things have worked out over time. So I'd say that's usually the ones that I think are the most interesting. So
yeah.
Amy, what are some of the most difficult projects you've worked on?
So there's the funny answer and the serious answer to this one. Animals are always a really good time, especially the unintentional ones. Probably one of the most difficult work days I have had was early on. We had a client who called me and said, hey, we had a raccoon get into our house and it chewed up some duct work. We need to get a duct test, to make sure that we found all the holes and sealed them up. So come on out. I went out, I looked at it with them. They cut a section of ductwork out, they sealed it up. We hooked the duct blaster up, and I have a theater fog machine that spits party fog into ductwork. If you just can't find a leak, it's a good way to find it. So, I put that in so we can see if there's any leaks. And, I'm sitting there running the fog machine, and all of a sudden, this large raccoon just breaks out of the plastic that's covering a return, and he's up crawling around in the ceiling joist between the floors, and we're all running around like, what do? We got to get the raccoon out of the house. The builder was running around not doing anything helpful. The HVAC installer was running around with a broom trying to hit him and knock him out of the floor trusses, and I'm yelling, don't knock him out of the floor trusses till we get a door open. And it was a roughed in house, so all the doors on the basement level where we were locked. So finally he like made it to the stairs and he ran outside and it was all okay. But so that was exciting and awful all at the same time. But I would say in general, the serious answer and what makes for a difficult project is when somebody hires you, as their technical, energy efficiency building expert, but then just doesn't listen to you. So, the internet is full of things that people say. There's a million opinions on the internet. And the thing about residential construction is this. On a lot of issues, the answer is really quite local. So what's absolutely true in California or in the desert is not necessarily true in the humid South. And what's true, in upstate New York may not be true here. So, when you're saying things local, but then people are getting a lot of other opinions that are not local, and then involve other climates, it can eat up a lot of time to explain that, but, it also can be sort of frustrating, especially when people make decisions that you told them not to make. And, sometimes you just kind of see a project go, someone makes a bad decision, and then there's this whole cascade of other decisions that happen that end up costing them a lot of money to try to mitigate the decision. And then in the end, it doesn't work out, and they're like, why didn't this work out? And, there's a little bit of, I tried to warn you. So that's always frustrating.
Yeah. I'd say in addition to that, in terms of difficult projects, it's not so much projects as much as difficult clients sometimes. We still do on occasion get somebody that wants to get a green certification purely because of kind of the cachet or the marketability of saying you're a green home. So you'll periodically get a builder that, number one, thinks they build a better house than they really do, and number two, think that the green certification is literally just paying some money and getting a piece of paper in the mail. And when you talk to somebody like that, the first thing that happens is a bunch of red flags go off, and then you basically go into the mode where you try and educate to say, it's not as simple as what you think. Here's the process, and here's why we do the things that we do, and here's how it's going to kind of manifest itself as a better house. And some of those people are converted from what they thought was going to be a simple kind of pay some money, I get a certification, to, oh, I didn't realize that there was actually some things that are going to be kind of tangible benefits, beyond, having the piece of paper. But there are still a couple there. Every once in a while, you just get a client that is just really, determined to not spend any extra money, not do any extra work, and think in the end that they're still going to have that piece of paper. And the biggest heartbreak in the world for me is at the end of a project, after trying to steer somebody in that direction, to realize that once you've tested and done the inspections, that the house isn't going to meet certification. And it's rare. It's very rare for it to happen. But when it does happen, it's very difficult to kind of explain, like, we tried to steer you in the direction it needed to go, and we tried to kind of, bring this up prior to running into the problem, and every once in a while it doesn't work out. So we try and avoid that, and there have certainly been times where I've talked to somebody and said, I don't know that this is the right track for you to head down. And it happens very, very rarely, but I'd much rather kind of tell somebody that ahead of time than to have them, spend some money to have me come out and do certification and inspections and find out, like, no, none of this actually is meeting the requirements of the program. So they're rare, but I would say that's always my least favorite project, is one that I know is not heading where it needs to go. So, but
you want to take this one?
Well,
how did you get started in our industry?
Well, so I started off doing an undergrad in architecture at Penn State. So I was actually training to be a commercial architect. And what was interesting is when I finished my undergrad in architecture, I really kind of felt like I needed to learn a little more on the kind of the technical end of things. And wonderfully, next door to the architecture department at Penn State was, I think at that time, was the #1 architectural engineering department in the country. And they were related enough that I actually was able to kind of go in and do a master's degree in the architectural engineering department in construction management. And when I finished up with my master's degree, I was actually fortunate enough to get a job working in the area while Amy was finishing her degrees for a residential home builder. So I actually was a construction manager for a home builder in Pennsylvania. So I kind of was, even early on, and this was back in the mid-90s, able to kind of balance between kind of the commercial design end of things and the residential construction end of things. And a lot of light bulbs went off at that time. And I finished that job after a couple of years when Amy finished up and we had relocated to DC. And I ended up getting back into commercial architecture for several years. And I think I always kind of missed the residential end of things. So when we ended up moving, we moved from Washington, D.C. out to Omaha, Nebraska. And Amy will probably talk about Omaha a little bit. I was a commercial architect out there. And then when we moved back to Asheville, and this was in 2004, I started off again working for a commercial architect, and over time, Amy ended up kind of growing the residential kind of HERS rating business to a point where I really kind of needed to come on board. She was just getting so busy, and it finally, that's when everything kind of came together, and it was like kind of understanding the design end of things and the construction end of things and the efficiency end of things. Really, I feel like this is where I ultimately was trying to get to. So that's how I got started in the industry, was like literally Amy begged me to come and work for the company. So well.
So here it is.
And how did you get started?
So people always ask me this when I'm at their house, doing inspections or whatever, and I'm like, that's a really long story. I don't know if you want to hear all of it. So I started out getting a degree in architectural engineering at Penn State and ended up staying on. I got a master's in mechanical engineering and then a PhD in architectural engineering again, with an emphasis on HVAC systems. And then after that, I was really young when I got my PhD. It was a long time ago. I felt too young to actually go directly into a faculty position. So I decided to do a postdoc for 2 years at the National Institute of Standards and Technology in their indoor air quality division. And that was a great way to spend 2 years. They do really great research and work with equipment that you probably couldn't work with anywhere else. So I spent 2 years there doing contaminant modeling and taking VOC measurements in green buildings. That was one of my projects. So, and just met a world-class group of people who, I just communicated with this week because I had a client who was interested in doing VOC measurements. So, I checked back in with some people I used to work with about what's been commercialized and, just as kind of a sounding board for how to help them understand what measurement does and doesn't mean, because that's really complicated. So I spent 2 years doing that. It was great. And then after that, I took a faculty position at the University of Nebraska. We lived in Omaha for a few years. And I really liked the research part of it. And I liked the teaching part of it too, but just the whole academic track was not my thing. So, and I sort of realized that I'm a little bit more entrepreneurial than that. So I decided to leave that job, and we also decided that it was where we live is really important to us, and we wanted to live somewhere cool while we were young. So we traveled around and we picked Asheville. So we came here, and at first I mostly was doing kind of researchy type projects that were sort of an extension of the research that I had done as a faculty member. And then gradually I got to know people in the green building community here, and they were like, we have these certifications, they're kind of popular, we need more people to do them. So I just sort of put it out there, that I could do them. And it's amazing, so I have, this pretty deep technical background that you would not necessarily need to have to do this, but builders really responded to it. And, I really, especially early on, I felt like the biggest barrier to builders getting into green building or energy efficient building was that they're afraid to try something new because it brings liability to them and they don't want to take risks. So having someone on their team who could help them read about products or read about techniques and say, here's what the pitfalls are, I think this is a good fit for you, or no, I think this is not a good fit here, this is why. People responded to that so well. So there's like this long and storied history, but I use all of it. So, I suppose it really was perfect.
Yeah, I would say so.
So we already did that.
Oh, well, there you go.
Okay.
What motivates you to continue working in our industry?
I really love working in this industry. Honestly, this sounds so cliche, but the people are really nice. Contractors are really great to work with. They will test you at first to make sure you know what you're talking about. But there just aren't very many nasty contractors, which is hard to believe. But we have so many genuinely nice people that we work with that, I think the world of and consider to be friends. And I really just enjoy getting up and going to work and working with them every day. And it's also fun to be part of actually making something that's physical, that's concrete. You can drive around Asheville and look at houses that you've touched, that you've worked on, that you've made better, and that's really cool.
For me, I think the thing that's interesting, having worked so much in commercial construction, is in general you're working on much larger scale projects. So they tend to be larger companies, and they tend maybe not even to be local companies. So, the interactions you have with those people aren't people that you're seeing all the time. And secondly, when the project's done, they may just move out of town. So going from kind of large scale projects like that to kind of smaller scale residential projects, and especially working with local companies, they're people that you see all the time around. Asheville's not a huge town, so not only are you seeing them at work, but you're bumping into them at grocery stores, or you're seeing them at a brewery or at a restaurant. And I think it's nice to have kind of a personal connection to the people you're working with in residential construction, just because there was so little of that when I was working in the commercial end of things. And the other thing that's nice about Western North Carolina is a lot of these builders went to college here, and they were learning, the home building industry while they were at school. So we've got a lot of people that either went to UNCA or Western Carolina, Warren Wilson. There's a number of colleges in the area, and because of that, a lot of these builders actually know each other, and there's a couple of builders that actually were roommates, So what's great is they're actually friends with each other. And we've actually even seen where if one builder's crew is, kind of light on work, we've seen that crew working for another builder in town because that builder had enough work. So it's a really refreshing way to kind of to work in an industry where everybody respects each other to that extent. So that's what makes it fun for me, is just the builders are talented, they're young, they're eager, and they're just genuinely nice people. So
do you want to take, what market barriers do you deal with on a regular basis?
I don't know if they're market barriers every project is probably kind of, there's a budget constraint that has to be dealt with. And I guess the way we look at it is, instead of trying to look at every project as how do we make this as efficient as possible, you have to look at it as what can we do to make this project as efficient as possible for the budget that they have. So, I mean, we have people that come in that are just like doing everything they can just to get the house built. I mean, and there's a lot of that. Young people, it's the first house that they're building, and it's like the budget's tight. So, what can make it kind of fun and challenging at the same time is that you've got to get creative, and in terms of reuse of materials, or is there a way of kind of getting double duty out of a piece of equipment? That kind of, there's something that makes it kind of a challenge on that end, but it also makes it a lot of fun at the same time. And then on the other end of things, sometimes you have people that kind of might have more money than they have sense. So it's like you'll kind of try and steer them towards what makes the most sense from a financial standpoint, and there's still kind of this kind of knee-jerk urge to kind of overspend even though they don't need to. So I think those are the challenges that we run into, is it's almost always based on budget.
So, one thing that I sometimes notice is Asheville is a pretty small town still, and sometimes there are products that get a lot of airplay and that people know about that we just don't have here yet. So one that comes to mind is AeroSeal, which I don't even fully understand how it works. It's basically this spray building sealant that they blow into a house using a blower door. So it's like aerosolized airborne caulk, basically. And so I don't know how you keep it from getting on the windows and the countertops and all that. But I would love to know. If anyone knows, call me. But I've had probably 5 builders ask me about it. And I've talked to people who don't live here who know about it, and they say, yeah, it's pretty cool. But we don't have a supplier here yet. So if we had a supplier, if we were a bigger city, we would have some of those options more available to us.
I guess in terms of market barriers, I think it's a tough question to answer, because in general, there hasn't ever been kind of a financial situation kind of nationwide that's created challenges here. Like that's what's interesting is when the recession happened, our business kind of stayed fairly steady because we were getting builders that were kind of scared about the recession and trying to market their houses. So what we lost in business from people just not building as many houses, we kind of replaced with more builders trying to learn how to do green building. And then as the recession kind of improved and the economy improved, we were just able to bring on people to be able to handle the increase in work. So, I mean, I don't know that there's ever been market barriers for us in the way that I think we're being asked. So, but.
What market opportunities do you think are most exciting?
What I have kind of always hoped is that with kind of the boom in population in Western North Carolina, there's been kind of a major increase in multifamily housing. And I think I've always kind of secretly wanted a developer to come to us and say, I want to do multifamily housing, but I really want to do it kind of, from an energy efficiency standpoint. And I think that's probably been the biggest challenge, is that at a certain point, even the developers that want to do that, at a certain point, the numbers come in and they're like, I've got to cut costs somewhere. And instead of cutting costs where I would think it makes the most sense, it's almost always, I've got to get the thing built. I got to get it built quickly. I got to get it built cheaply. Energy efficiency tends to take a back seat to a lot of other things. So they're not going to give up granite countertops, but they'll give up the air sealing and the proper insulation and the tight blower door test. So I still hold out hope, especially with all the multifamily housing that's going on, that somebody is going to realize that there's a market for people that want to have apartments that don't cost a fortune to heat and cool. So,
or something that's really cutting edge, somebody
Yeah.
who would really go outside the box for multifamily.
and I think it will happen eventually. It's just we're still kind of waiting for it. So, but
I think what excites me the most is, I know that we're in a time when environmentalists are maybe a little bit depressed because the environmental movement does not seem to be expanding as rapidly as we all know that it needs to. But, what I know is that ignoring problems does not make them go away. It makes them worse. And eventually, our environment can't be denied. We will need to live a greener, more energy efficient lifestyle. And I believe that will happen in our lifetimes. So to me, it's really exciting to be developing this expertise and be helping to develop these other professionals in this whole community of green builders in Asheville. We know how to do this. We are working with people on an almost daily basis who are building net zero energy homes or net zero energy ready homes. So it's exciting to me that we're developing this because I know that it is going to be so needed as the future marches on. So it's just really cool to me to be in on sort of the ground floor of laying the groundwork for that to happen. Because it is going to have to be how everybody does things eventually. What help do you think our business would need to grow and prosper?
I think most of the help probably needs to kind of happen on the code end of things and kind of on the kind of energy policy end of things. So, I think the challenge that we always have is, especially in North Carolina, as building codes are developed, the base codes that are coming out have some really good things in it that kind of will steer builders towards building more energy efficient, buildings, and kind of educating them at the same time. And I think the challenge in our state has always been there's an urge by the home building associations to kind of roll back some of those code requirements because they look at it as it's ultimately going to cost more money for me to build the house. And because of that, we always every 3 years get kind of excited about things that really should be part of the code that at the last second get rolled back. And it's frustrating from our end knowing that it's like we have the capability and the builders are smart enough to be able to handle those changes of the code. And the thing that's always frustrating for us is what incremental increases in construction cost are more than made up for by the energy savings by the homeowner. So we spend a lot of time trying to convince the home building associations that to look at it that way. And I think it's every 3 years we kind of have to go in knowing we're not going to get everything we want. The code's not going to stay the way it was originally written, and I think we just kind of have to roll with that. I think over time, everybody's going to be forced into having to build that way. I mean, I think the environment's going to kind of indicate that we have to do it, and I think the codes will have to catch up. But how we grow and prosper is where we require all builders to have to build to the level that our green builders are. Because the way I look at it is the green builders aren't doing something over and above what they are required to do. They're really building houses properly.
And then the green builders can go to the next step.
Exactly.
Because this is all about being better.
So, I mean, we certainly are never going to complain. We've done well. We've stayed busy. it would be really exciting to see if every builder had to build to those kinds of levels, being able to take on even more employees to be able to kind of educate builders and to provide those services. So,
yeah, I mean, and I think in terms of things that are helpful to our business, one thing that we all in the building science community, I think, kind of take for granted, but shouldn't, is that people out there are doing research that is really practical and useful, that they're publishing, that we can get access to. So, if someone comes to me and, has read a bunch of confusing stuff about, moisture in spray foam houses or something, there's a body of knowledge and research that I can go out there and get and read, that's in the public domain, that can help me understand what those issues are, and I can share that with them, and it's published and it's there. So, having this publicly funded, largely, research out there to help us with building techniques is really important, because so much of what makes buildings work isn't a specific product that a manufacturer is necessarily going to spend money on to research themselves. The industry isn't just going to do this for us. Buildings are really complex systems that interact. And as I said, it's very climate dependent. So we need to understand how these things work in dry climates and moist climates and hot climates and cold climates. So, having that research out there, because, I have things for sure that I've learned in the field. And, sometimes you'll get a builder who builds a similar house 30 or 40 times and does a few things differently, and you're pretty sure what the effect of one thing versus the other is, but it's not the same as a formal research study. So having that research out there, it is really helpful to us. Matt, what advice would you have for someone looking to join our industry?
The one thing I would say, and I mean, and I only say this because I kind of had this background, but even in high school and in college, even though I was studying kind of the design end of things as an architecture student, my dad was an electrician. So the jobs I would have during the summer were tending to a mason, or I was an electrician's apprentice, or I worked for a plumber. It was a lot of kind of hands-on stuff that I wasn't necessarily getting in college. And they went really nicely hand in hand, because a lot of what I was being taught on the design end of things either sometimes conflicted with what I was seeing in the field, or I would be able to think of what I did on a construction site and apply it towards that design end of things. So what I would tell somebody that's looking to join the industry is kind of get a well-rounded education. I think there's stuff that you can get from college that's extremely valuable, and I think there's stuff that you can get from real life that complements that really well. And I think the most successful people I've seen that have worked in architecture or worked in the building industry or even in the HERS rating industry are people that didn't necessarily have just one track of education, but kind of saw things from a lot of different perspectives. And I think it makes you a much more rounded person in our industry. So that's what I would say is, like, if you've spent a lot of time doing a specific kind of education, like, break out of that and spend the summer, lugging concrete block around. I mean, you'd be amazed what you learn on a construction site. So that's probably my advice. So
yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of ways in, and some people get into it by getting a lot of degrees, and then you learn the practical stuff in the field. And other people start in the field and they build things and they learn the technical stuff as they have to. Yep. And I know a lot of smart people who know a lot of things who have come from both of those traditions. I guess one thing I'll share that is maybe more specific to me, because I have a lot of degrees and I am really not big enough to carry concrete blocks around all summer, and this is just good advice to anyone, even if they're already in the field. There's so much that you can learn from any person on a construction site. So never never forget that every single person around you is somebody who can teach you something.
Yep.
And especially for me, because I did not swing a hammer, I always talk to electricians, to plumbers, to carpenters, and what you learn is really practical, because there are some really good ideas about how to do things, and they would work really well if they weren't pretty much impossible to build. And there are some ways to build things that are really helpful to know about. So, HVAC contractors have taught me so much. And I'm just really grateful to the people who, were nice enough to talk back and forth with me. And I know that a lot of those people have learned a lot from me, because a lot of those people have a lot of field experience and not a lot of book experience. So it's really great to have people that you can learn from and that will learn from you. So I think because what we're doing, workmanship matters so much. You are not going to build a good energy efficient building without workmanship. You can't do it. You can maybe miss things a little bit technically, and if you've got good workmanship, maybe it's forgiving. But if you've got poor workmanship, it will not happen. So it matters so much. So you need to know about it, and you definitely need to be able to speak the language of people who do it and explain to them, why we're doing what we're doing, and come up with some creative ways to get there. So learning from everybody is really important. And I think you can take any life experience that you have and probably apply it well on a construction site. We used to have a field technician who had been a copy machine repairman before he worked with us. And you'd be surprised how much you learn as a copy machine repairman. That translates well to home energy
and I'll be
writing.
honest, as part of the reason we hired him was when we were interviewing him, he talked about how, he was a copy repairman or a copy machine repairman in Hawaii.
Yeah.
So like you oftentimes didn't necessarily have access to the parts you needed. So he was like cobbling together fixes for machines when he didn't really have the parts he needed. And what I'll tell you is that's a great person to hire, because they can think on their feet and they can kind of be creative and come up with a solution that isn't necessarily inside the box. So I think it's a good point I think part of the reason that we're successful as we are is nobody has ever accused us of kind of being aloof on a job site. There is so much to learn from everybody, and I think the bigger thing is that you need to respect everybody on the job site. And I mean, there's people working on those construction sites that are working extremely hard in really tough environments, when it's 10 degrees outside or when it's 100 degrees outside, and they're spending 9 or 10 hours a day out there. Like, you should respect that. So that's probably the one thing I would tell somebody new to the industry is there's something to learn from everybody on that job site. So,
what do you do to learn new skills to keep yourself current?
I'll be honest. I think the amount of work that we do in the field, it's like what ends up happening is if there's new technologies out there, we eventually are seeing them, even if we're not kind of learning about them first, because somebody out there is reading a lot of stuff and they're trying out and experimenting stuff. So we'll go onto a job site and I'll be like, wow, I've never seen that piece of equipment before. And, you start asking questions of the HVAC guy or the framer, and, it's like all of a sudden you're like, okay, I'm going to keep an eye on this house and see how this works out. And it's a really great way of keeping yourself current, is just being aware of what you're seeing on the job site, because sometimes there's new stuff that comes out and it's infinitely better than what other people had been using. And every once in a while, something new comes out and you're like, boy, that didn't work out very well. Maybe we shouldn't use that again. So I think it kind of just happens inherently with the work that we do, is you kind of stay current because everybody else is trying to stay current.
Yeah.
So.
And like doing HERS ratings, it's a heavily regulated industry, and there's a lot of continuing education required. And with Matt being an architect and me being an engineer, there's always continuing ed that you have to do. Yeah. So conferences are great. I usually go to the ASHRAE conferences, the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers. About every other year, we try to go to the ResNet conference.
The State Energy
Conference
is always great.
You got to be careful because you can go to conferences all the time and not get any actual work done. And there's a limit. Yeah. So you want to go to conferences and hear about the new stuff, and then you want to come back and watch people try stuff and see how it really works.
Yep.
What's a source that you go to for innovative ideas or new products?
That's a good question.
I don't know. They just sort of find us.
Yeah, I mean,
that's what's great about our builders is, we have just enough builders who are interested in trying new things that they'll hear about something like at the Home Builders Show or something, and they'll be like, Amy, what do you think about this? And I'll go look it up and
conversely, but conversely, there's also a lot of suppliers of equipment that either contact us directly and say, "Hey, do you have time to have lunch? I wanted to show you a new piece of equipment that's coming out." So there's a lot of education that happens on that end. Or the other thing that'll happen is we might stumble on a piece of equipment or a new material where I don't know what I need to know about it. So then I can go to a supplier and say, "Hey, I just saw this on a job site. Tell me about it. Tell me, cost-wise, what are we looking at? Why do you think this is a better?" So there are times where my curiosity will get me to start calling around until somebody who, distributes that piece of material can tell me something about it. So I think it kind of happens both ways, where people are contacting us about stuff and we're learning, and then there's other times where it's just like, I've never seen that before, I need to learn some more about it. So I think it kind of just happens naturally as part of our job.
Yeah,
so.
They find us.
Is it possible to have a 30 to 40 year career in our industry?
God, I hope so.
Yeah.
We're about halfway into that, so catch up with us in 20 years.
Yeah,
we'll confirm, but I feel like it's going to be okay.
I think what ends up happening is we're a small enough company that we're doing kind of the physical stuff in the field as well as the stuff in the office. And I will tell you, being in my, we'll call it mid-40s.
Let's call it that.
We'll call it mid-40s. Some of the climbing around and kind of pulling yourself up into the rafters is a little harder than it used to be 10 years ago. So I think there's kind of a natural transition that probably happens from when you're younger and out in the field to as you get older and either kind of overseeing maybe people in a larger company or transitioning to kind of maybe a little heavier in the office. I think that that's something that will manifest itself over time. But I'll be honest with you, part of the reason I feel like I'm in good shape is because there's a mix of, office stuff and having to go out and climb around in crawl spaces and climb around in attics and stuff. So I actually think, if nothing else, this has been the best career I've ever had in terms of maintaining my health. I'll be perfectly honest. Sitting in an office 8 hours a day is not the healthiest thing in the world. I'm pretty convinced. So
there's a part of me that really dreads the idea that later in my career I might be in the field less, because I really like being in the field.
Yeah, I do too.
That's, if our company got bigger, I probably wouldn't be able to be in the field as much, or if I got older, maybe I wouldn't be able to be in the field as much, and I would really hate that. So there's a part of me that really resists the idea of that, and I think regardless of how things go, I think it'll be really important to me to carve out a certain amount of time that is spent in the field looking at real stuff.
Let's think about it. Somebody comes out of college, let's say they're 21. 30 years later, you're 51. There's no reason why you can't be doing the stuff we're doing when you're 51. And I'll be honest with you, there's no reason you can't do it 40 years later when you're 61. And we certainly know people in our industry that are well above 61 years old that do this for a living. So it's totally possible. I'm
And
positive.
it's
of
hard
that.
to imagine
So,
a future where 20 to 30 years from now, we're not going to need energy efficiency.
Yep.
In fact, if anything, I'd say we're going to need it more.
Yep, I would agree. What do building owners and operators not know about their buildings?
Ooh, lots. A lot of owners, and so we work in residential. A lot of building owners don't know anything about their mechanical ventilation system. A lot of them don't even know they have one. They don't know why they have one. They don't know what the right setting is. Luckily, most of them, you can set them, and as long as you don't touch it, even if the power goes out, it just comes back on the same setting. So hopefully they're just all on autopilot. But people do not understand their ventilation system.
Similar, I mean, and I think because of that, a lot of the work that we do is to try and make as many houses as kind of hands off as possible. That where the house just kind of does what it needs to do without a lot of kind of owner intervention. Because of that reason, and the challenge that you have is even if you have a homeowner that does understand it and you can convey that information, it's not likely that 30 years down the road, they're still in that same house. You know, that house is going to get sold to the next person. And unless that information can get conveyed to the next person, you potentially hand off a house that somebody doesn't know how to operate correctly and ends up doing kind of the opposite of what you want it to do. So we spend a lot of time trying to simplify the technical aspects of a house. And we get people that come in and where an architect or a designer has really thrown some really complicated stuff into a house. And even though it seems like our job would be to kind of throw a bunch of more technical stuff into it to make it more efficient, it actually oftentimes ends up being the opposite, where it's like, hey, there might be a simpler way let's simplify this so that nobody has to like have a degree in it to run the house. So I think there's that part of it. There's some challenges sometimes with renewable energy, active solar in terms of photovoltaics that can throw people for a loop sometimes. And I think what happens is when you get into kind of complicated kind of billing structures with utilities, somebody that has a ton of solar panels on their house think that like they can just kind of operate the house the way they always have. And what we've learned with our house being net zero is there's different rates of cost for utilities. There's kind of a nights and weekend rate for electricity, and there's kind of during the day rates where you have to be careful about when you use electricity. We have a sign
on our clothes dryer that says when we can use it and when we can't.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are times where somebody kind of, builds their house, the house of their dreams and with a ton of solar, and they're like, I can just do anything I want. And to a certain extent, that's true, but you also have to be careful about when you do those things that you want. So there's a lot of kind of returning to us after somebody's lived in a house where all of a sudden there's a bunch of questions and we have to then clarify like this is what's happening. Here's how you rectify that. So I think there's a lot of kind of post-construction commissioning that would be valuable for a lot of homeowners.
Probably.
To kind of learn how to do.
I have a little bit of frustration around how people understand issues like indoor air quality. There's certain things that get a lot of press that people just know. So, paint is a good example, or carpet. People know about low VOC paints and people know about green carpets. But there are other things like the fact that cooking creates a lot of particulate matter that is not particularly good for you to breathe, and candles and incense, and you should use your kitchen range hood when you're cooking. And I think human beings are probably not really good at assessing relative risks anyway. But this is a scenario that some flavor of it has happened to me multiple times. I'll be in a house doing a test out on a house, and the homeowner is expressing to me that they're upset because low VOC but not zero VOC paint got used on their project, and their kids are breathing in these chemicals and they're really upset about it. And then while this homeowner's saying this to me, this kid comes home from school and starts cooking themselves a snack on the large gas commercial range, and not using the kitchen hood while they're doing it. And I'm sort of just there like, whoa, that just happened. And okay, we need to slow down and explain this. But, I think around indoor air quality, there are a lot of relative risks that people are not assessing well, and people would be making different decisions if they understood them. But people just don't know. And it's partly just, I think, a byproduct of, if something's a product, it gets marketed and you know about it, like no VOC paint. And if it's not, like cooking, which is something that we have to do, then people just don't know.
Yep. What will a high-performance building look like in 2024, 2030?
Well, I think in 2024, they're probably not going to look a lot different than they do now. I think we'll continue to make incremental gains, and that'll be easier in some states than others. North Carolina is just getting a new building code that isn't much of a step into the future. And being on the 6-year cycle that we're on, it's going to be pretty close to 2024 before we get another code. My hope would be that in 2024, every home would have a blower door test, so we at least know how airtight we're building. And that we'd be able to really pick up some of this really low-hanging fruit that we know makes houses better and has a very slam dunk payback period for homes. I do expect, by 2030, we'll probably have some new equipment options that we don't know about now. There's some really exciting stuff happening around battery technologies. I don't actually ever expect a lot of homes to go off grid. For reasons that I could get into but are long. But I think that we probably will be using batteries to smooth out the demand in our electric service. I hope that we develop ways to use the batteries from our electric vehicles to integrate with our house and maybe with our solar. That would be exciting. So, I think we'll see some new things, but I also think that we have a lot of just efficiency stuff that isn't that hard and none of it's rocket science, that we just need to find logistical ways to make happen in every house. And I think, we'll continue to develop better ways to do even better than the code minimum house in our green homes.
I would say that we're probably going to see a lot more net zero houses, and I think it's going to be purely financial more than anything else. I think as the utility companies kind of raise rates, and as we see the cost of producing renewable energy come down, I think there's going to be this kind of natural crossroads that happens where it's like, hey, it's actually cheaper for us to generate enough power to offset our utility usage, to where, like, what we did here with a net zero house is not going to be kind of this oddball thing anymore. It's going to be a pretty common practice. And I think, I'd like to think by 2024, 2030, we're going to get past where we're handicapping renewables and we're rewarding fossil fuels, to where it's like, if everything was on the same level and competing on the same level, I think renewables are really going to start to take off. And I think we're going to start seeing that manifest itself in these houses. So that's where I hope things are going. I really hope it comes down to where the code isn't what's dictating people building the right house. It's literally that it's the cheaper way to build a house is to do it correctly. So drop some industry wisdom on us.
You can have a net zero energy house.
Yep.
Everybody can. 2 teachers who build a house and want to live in it can have a net zero energy house. A nurse that we worked with built a house, net zero energy. We did it. It doesn't have to be weird. It doesn't have to look different than the other houses on the street. You can just have a net zero energy house.
I think that the industry wisdom I can think of is that I guess it's more on our end of things to kind of really get the point across that you can't look at everything purely as how much is it adding to the cost of my house to add energy efficiency into it.